And hello, and welcome to Presence. I appreciate you joining me today for another episode we're doing on science and spirituality. And most of you have probably seen the first four episodes that I did with Joe Master Leo, who is author of Ambient Christ. The reason that I'm doing this series on science and spirituality is because it's a hot topic. A lot of people have expressed interest in it, and a lot of people are having this discussion about science and spirituality versus science and religion. So I wanted to just do some episodes on this just to kind of put our foot in the water, if you will. And for the next two episodes, I'm going to wrap up as much as I have to say about it at this point in time by going solo today and then in the next episode, and specifically talking integral theology and science. So I will take, as I have in all my previous episodes, the principles that we have gleaned from the biblical narrative when we have applied an integral lens through which to read it and understand it and interpret what we see as the trajectory and the story that integral theology is pointing us to. And this is why it's exciting to me to talk about integral theology and spirituality. Now, in the episodes that we saw with Joe, he has done a tremendous amount of research and did a great job talking about the different people that have had a real interest in the movement or trajectory of science into the realm of the subatomic world in the sense of electricity, electromagnetism, light. We discussed Tesla and other brilliant people who were seeing that there are these unified fields of energy that have to do with the functioning of all the galaxies, everything we know about the universe. And so light and light principles were very much the topic that Joe examined and did a great job. And the reason I loved to bring in Joe's work is he's one of the people today who's a proponent of an integral look at science and spirituality, which is what we're saying the biblical narrative does. But a couple other people that I'd like to bring in and some things I'd like to discuss at this point in time. I suspect I'll be doing more on this subject in the future. But at this point in time, a couple of things occurred to me. One was I read an article called Information Theory. Now, this is fascinating to me. And by the way, I'm going to talk about two different approaches here. I'm going to add a couple other flavors to our quantum physics and the scientists that are into quantum physics. I'm going to add a couple of other approaches that people are taking to the idea of what's behind it all, what's behind this subatomic field that seems to hold all things together cohesively. And so one of the articles that really attracted me was an article on information theory. So I've got some notes on it here. The 20th century, the article points out, first developed the idea of dark matter, and probably most of you are like me, I've heard about dark matter, but dark matter is a theory. It is not something that has ever been observed, nor is it anything that can be proved in an experiment. But what's interesting is that when these physicists use their mathematics and they come up with theories about what is the mystery behind all the things that we see in this universe, dark matter is one of the theories. Because the question is why doesn't the universe just fly apart? Why isn't there total chaos? What is that field of unity and cohesiveness? So even though for over 60 years, researchers have sought to detect dark matter, to this point, there are theories, but no evidence. Well, a Dr. Melvin Vopson in the UK is working on something called information theory. He says that information is the fundamental building block of the universe and has mass. Now, this is really interesting. Information is the fundamental building block of the universe. Dr. Archibald Wheeler uses the phrase it from bit. And what he means is every particular particle in the universe emanates from the information locked inside it. That's fascinating to me. There's something called the Landauer principle that says if you erase one bit of information, you release a tiny amount of heat. Therefore, Landauer connected information to energy. Now, in the previous episodes, we looked at light and electromagnetism as energy. Here, you have quantum physicists who are connecting information with energy. And furthermore, according to the scientific journals, this principle of information being connected to energy has held up even after a thorough testing. So I found that very interesting. And the reason I'm pushing this is, you know what my trajectory is. You know I'm going to get out the Venn diagram, and you know I'm going to go form to formless. And so what we're really talking about is, has science begun to see that there's something in a realm that looks a whole lot like what we're calling a formless realm? And one other person that came to mind when I was putting this together was Dr. Will Keepan. Dr. Keepan is a physicist who also is very much involved in world religions, everything from Christianity to Far Eastern religions. As a matter of fact, I had an opportunity, Danae and I were at a conference, I guess it's been probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And I had an opportunity to sit down and have a quick lunch with Will. And Dr. Keepan authored a book called Song of the Earth. I would recommend this to anyone that's interested in science and spirituality and consciousness and information, and what we're saying as that which is behind all that has been manifested into the realm of galaxies and stars and planets, meaning the realm of form. It's a great book, The Song of the Earth. Will Keepan is one of the authors. In this book, he talks about quantum non-locality. This is another thing that I think is so really cool. When you leave the Newtonian world of time and space, where we measure everything about how long does it take to get there, how much space is there from here to there, we understand time and space in this world. This is the way we navigate. How long will it take me to get there? What's the mileage or the space between point A and point B? But in the quantum world of non-locality, after two particles interact, their spin properties become interconnected, so that if the spin state of one particle changes, the other particle changes at the same time instantaneously, even if those particles are in two separate parts of the galaxy. There is no time and space in the quantum world when you do these experiments with interactive or interacting particles, showing this interconnectivity. And so Dr. Keepan talks about that as moving beyond Newtonian time and space models that govern the bigger macro pictures of the galaxy, meaning the realm of what I would call form. What I really liked is Will Keepan introduced me to the work of David Bohm, B-O-H-M. Google David Bohm if you want to see some really amazing stuff on quantum science and spirituality. He lived from 1917 to 1992. I've got a couple quotes written down here from David Bohm. He says, the cosmos is a single unbroken wholeness in flowing movement. Two aspects to that I really like. Number one, the cosmos, the universe. And remember, in the biblical narrative, we absolutely have cosmology. We have a cosmology in Genesis 1. In the beginning, we have heavens and earth. And that cosmology moves all the way to John's Revelation, where the cosmology changes or is transformed into a new heaven and earth. Well, Dr. Bohm says that this cosmos is a single unbroken wholeness. This is interconnectivity. This is the opposite of separation consciousness, separation thinking. And remember, in the biblical narrative, we have defined separation thinking as death. Death represents separation. And we're going to see that this has been a narrative that has not been challenged in the realm of religion. In fact, religion has embraced separation between people, depending on who I am, I will then become the judge of who is separate from me, separate from God, separate from each other, etc. But the cosmos is telling us, the nature of nature is telling us that it's a single unbroken wholeness in flowing movement. Flowing movement is a constant state of transformation. And yeah, you got it. I'm going to go back to my event at some point, and we're going to talk here about these various modes of moving from realms of form to realms of formlessness, all of which are unified, all of which are interconnected, but there's a flow to it. There's a flow to this movement. It's been going on since human consciousness has been on this planet, and that flow requires a transform or transformational process of some kind. Dr. Bohm also used the terms explicit order and implicate order. Bohm says there's an explicit order and there's an implicate. The implicate order is present everywhere, but visible nowhere. It extends throughout space and time, but also far beyond space and time. So the implicate order would be what I would understand to be the realm of the unseen, where the explicit order is the realm of the seen. So in the biblical narrative, we have the realm of the seen and the unseen. And this, again, is going to fit nicely into our trajectory that we use in our Venn diagram, showing that there are two realms, an implicate realm and an explicit realm. And so he says that in addition to energy and matter, the universe also has a third element. And instead of information, Bohm said that element is consciousness. Now think about that. These are quantum physicists talking about some type of information field, talking about some kind of consciousness. Bohm even suggested that perhaps the answers to the reality of all things may even lie beyond the field of science itself. That's a pretty bold statement. We certainly know that the answers lie far beyond religion. We'll talk about that a lot more as we go through these episodes. So he referred to this state of intelligence or understanding as something similar to the Hindu term of prana. Prana is a state of wisdom higher than knowledge obtained by reasoning. This is just a term that Bohm liked. As a matter of fact, he talked with some Eastern teachers, and he really found an attraction, again, to this trajectory of moving into realms of formlessness with regard to consciousness. One quote I'll give you from Will Keep, and then I'm going to get into some of the diagrams and some of the points that I see and the way I would outline some of these points that I've just been bringing up to you. But a final quote from Will Keep, and I thought would be interesting to you. He says, if you identify with your form and attributes, you are but a speck in the cosmos. But if you identify with your being or essence, the whole of the divine is merged into you in all its depth and splendor. Your true identity is thus oneness with all that is, oneness with God. So here we see that quantum physicists are also, in many cases, very spiritual people who have a faith, excuse me, who have a faith that involves something that the biblical narrative refers to as God. So just as science is now discovering new layers to the cosmos, before all we had was good old Sir Isaac Newton. The best we could do is shoot apples off of people's head and say, look, they fall to the ground. Well, we may have probably found through science a few other things that help us navigate the universe as well, time and space, and certainly Einstein's work. But these discoveries of new layers within science understanding a cosmos that's always been there, to me, they reflect that models like spiral dynamics and the movement into an integral consciousness layer is us discovering new layers within the biblical narrative. The biblical narrative has always been there, so's the cosmos. Cosmos has been there, so's the narrative, but what are we saying? We're discovering new things about the cosmos. These things didn't just come into existence. Quantum didn't just come into existence. They've always been there, but we haven't had the knowledge and evolved to a point where we could begin to investigate and better understand it. This is exactly what we're saying has happened with the narrative. It started in this 2,000-year-old traditional age we've talked about many times over. And they did the best they could with interpreting it from that lens, looking through that lens. Moved on to the modern lens and all that came with it. Most of the progressive Christian, meaning religious interpreters of Christology, are postmodern. And now we're saying, is there another layer? Just like in science, is there something deeper? We're saying, yeah, absolutely. There's something much deeper. There is this integral realm. So let me pull up here on a screen for us, if I could, our first chart. There we go. So remember that Dr. David Bohm said we've got an explicate world and an implicate world. Once again, I am saying that the realm of form is the explicate. Why a form? Because a form is something that you can measure, you can quantify, you can study it objectively. But when you get into the implicate realm, you are moving in the implicate realm to something that does not act the same way as the explicate. This is the biggest mystery in science right now. I just saw a special on Nova the other day, a public broadcasting system program for those of us here in the US. And the big conundrum, the big question in science is, why does it seem that the explicate macro world is in one type of relativity, objectivity, and observability, and yet when you go subatomic and you get in the quantum realm, you have different principles operating? How can you have two different things happening and yet at the same time have a cohesive universe? That's the big mystery. And so, of course, if I think about Joe's book, I put light up here in the formless because, again, Tesla and so many others who are into light and energy, electromagnetism, etc., this is a huge part of the implicate realm, as we know, in the new heaven and earth. In the new heaven and earth, there is no night there. God is its light. And how do we get to that layer? We don't start in that layer, just as science did not start in the quantum realm. Rather, this is referred to in the narrative as a time of darkness, meaning that they were just beginning the journey of discovery. Now, the reasons I've got Romans 13 and 1 Peter up there is because you didn't get up one day and say, yeah, yesterday we were Newtonian, today we're quantum physicists. No, there's a transformational process in all these things. And the same is true in the biblical narrative. You go through transformation. So in Romans 13, at that time when Paul was meeting in that center part of the diagram in the first century, Paul was acknowledging the night is far spent, The day is at hand. So one was coming to an end transitionally, and the light was coming into being transitionally. So you have an end of darkness at the same time accompanied by the beginning of light. First Peter uh, puts the wording a little bit differently. In First Peter, Peter says that they are waiting for the coming of Christ, and he likens it to the rising of the day star, the coming up of the sun. The sun is our day star, the rising of the day star. And so this time of light was coming, and it's associated with the transformative work of Christ or the transformative work of Christology, moving from unconsciousness to consciousness. And again, consciousness, this is one of the information theory elements. It's one of the elements that Bohm talked about. And so now all of a sudden, here we are in the biblical narrative talking about a trajectory that seems to be mapping out very consistently with the trajectory of science. Now, I'm going to get to a diagram at some point, maybe next week. I'll see how my time goes out here because I'm never scripted. I just put up some diagrams and start talking. And I don't like to make these go much more than 30, 35 minutes. But at some point, I've got a diagram here showing why science and religion won't work. It won't work. Why science and religion had to split, but why science and spirituality absolutely will work, and why the outcome of the biblical narrative had to be, according to the nature of the universe itself, an outcome of God as the spirit that is the cohesive force behind all things. And we have to remind ourselves also, I put up here at the bottom of this, as you can see, when we're talking about form and the explicit world, all forms just play a role and function. My biological form, I'm in a biological form, but it's just playing a role and function. I get to navigate all the other forms that are here on this planet. They were made for my enjoyment, and that's why I'm here. Now, on the other hand, that's not my identity. My identity transcends the role and function of my biological form. And this is true of the identity that's throughout the narrative. So, for example, if I look at explicate and implicate in the sense of just Jerusalem, I picked it out as one element out of 100 that I could have chosen. But if you look at explicate and implicate realms in terms of Jerusalem, we know that, again, the historical Jerusalem was a boundary-driven, ethnocentric, geographical, observable form. It was observable. And so we know that that fit beautifully into the definition of David Bohm of being language that would apply to that which is explicate. However, there is a New Jerusalem. The New Jerusalem is in the world of the implicate. There is no microscope or telescope that can find the New Jerusalem. This is why it was so difficult for people living 2,000 years ago to understand some of the principles that Jesus talked about with regard to the kingdom of God. And I'll mention that here in just a minute as well. One thing I thought about when I was going through the Jerusalem thing here, I was thinking about the writer of Hebrews. And when talking about Father Abraham, the writer said, as far as Abraham was concerned, he was seeking a city whose builder and maker was God. And so here we have two realms, two heaven and earths, two realms, explicate, implicate. In the realm of form, what do we find? We find buildings, but they're made with hands. Whose hands? Human hands. And so we're going to get back to the principle of self as source, which I have mentioned umpteen times in other podcasts. And when you get into whose builder is God, now we have God as source or spirit as source. And this implicate realm is the realm from which all things are manifested, from the realm of the unseen, boom, came this explosive manifestation of matter and all that we see today that coalesced in a self-organizing form somehow, some way, that seems to indicate there was something intelligent behind it. And we see that in that sense, the explicit world is what David Bohm refers to as a secondary phenomenon, meaning it came about secondarily. First and foremost, the source of it all is the implicate realm. And then, of course, we know that again, you have to have transform. How do we get from the historical Jerusalem to the new Jerusalem? How did we get from one to the other? That's through the realm of transformation. And so when we look in Paul's work to the Galatians, Paul says, the Jerusalem that now is, and he's referring to, in their day, present day Jerusalem, the city that has been the city of the fathers for centuries and centuries past. But he said, we are children of a new Jerusalem that is above. So in the transform, we are discovering, yes, there is a realm beyond this historical form-driven Jerusalem. And at this time, we understand it to be that which is above, to use that language, transitional language, because when we get to John's Revelation, that new Jerusalem comes down, meaning that there's an integration, that we now are becoming integrated. This idea of an integral consciousness is an understanding of the pervasive all in allness of that which we understand to be God. So let's see what else I've got here before I bring this to a close and before we go to the next episode. Let's look at science as a narrative. I've already said what the biblical narrative is, how it outlines, what its trajectories are. So I just put this down in the Venn and I thought, here's the same thing. Science started out with Newton and all the Newtonian laws, and they work really well in the realm of forms, meaning anything that can be observed, anything that can be measurable, quantifiable, definable. All of these things work really well in science, and they legitimately work in science, and they have a role and function. All of the universe has a role and function. Thank goodness for Mother Earth. So this is where science started, just like at the very beginning, when Christology was first interpreted 2,000 years ago, the natural thought was, well, let's make it a form. Let's make it a new religion, a new form to replace what we think was the old form. And so this was a natural result that brought Christology into the realm of religion. But going back to science, I put quantum physics in transform. Now, why did I do that? Why is quantum physics in transform? In quantum physics, I would give the example of what was discovered in Copenhagen, and actually all the way back to around 1943, I believe it was. And that was, they worked on the smallest particle of light itself, which is a photon. And so amazingly, they did experiments where they found that if a photon is observed, it is a particle, but unobserved, it is a wave. Now, don't ask me to explain all that or the specifics of the experiment. I'm not a quantum physicist. I have a hard enough time trying to hang in there with theology. But the bottom line was, a photon observed is a particle, but unobserved, it's a wave. That is transformational language in my mind, meaning in the world of form, you simply say, what is it? Is it this form or that form? Is it this thing or that thing? Is it a particle or is it a wave? It has to be one or the other. It has to be one or the other. But in transform, when we move into the realm of transform, the photon has two properties. If it's observed, according to the scientific experimentation, it's a particle. Unobserved, it's a wave. This is pointing, I believe, the quantum world is pointing to what David Bohm was suggesting, and that is there's something even beyond possibly quantum physics itself. There could be a formless field, a field from which light emanates, from which information emanates, from which some type of consciousness emanates. It's a field even beyond quantum physics that is supplying us with the answers to the cohesiveness of this universe. What an amazing thing. Well, I have quite a number of other slides. I know you are surprised at this, that I have a lot more slides and a lot more to say, but I'm looking at the clock. It looks to me like I'm getting real close to 30 minutes. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to quit for right now for today in this episode, but next week, I'm going to pick up these trajectories and I'm going to go even further and deeper into the biblical narrative, because the biblical narrative, when we look at it through an integral lens, many things begin to jump off the page that we never saw before, just as many things jump off the page when the physicist begins to look through quantum methods into an implicate world that lies beyond the explicate. So I will pick it up here next week. I appreciate you guys all joining me for this series, and certainly send to me any of your questions that you have at info@presence.com, and I'll do my best to incorporate those into these episodes. And then also, if next week's the final episode, I'll give an update on kind of where I see things going as we go into the spring. So again, thanks for being with me. I'll see you next time.